But we need to be asking ourselves, what should Canada and British Columbia and local communities be doing to actually make a difference? If we have so much room between the state of early development as it exists in Canadian society and where we'd really like it to be by the time children reach school age, we obviously aren't doing enough, and we aren't doing enough of the things in the right way to really support families with young children in Canadian society. Well, in order to answer that question, I'd like to turn first to the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization just ran an international commission that was all about the way in which we need to invest in society, in other words, the social determinants of health, to improve human health and well-being. In their report, they devoted an entire chapter to what we should be doing in the early years, called Equity from the Start. And they made a number of recommendations in that chapter. But the most important one was to say that all of the countries of the world, all 194 that are part of the World Health Organization system, ought to be committing to and implementing a comprehensive approach to early life that builds on the basic health systems that we already have for immunization, but extends interventions in early life to include social and emotional and language and cognitive development. So how has Canada done up until this point? And the answer is we haven't done very well. If you look at what we've got in Canadian society, this PowerPoint is gradually showing you what's going on. We have concerns for early child development from ministries and other agencies in health, social services, programs that are designed particularly for early intervention, programs for family support, and programs that come out under the auspices of Ministry of Education. And they get delivered variously through public health systems, through parks and recreation, through municipal governments, through community services, and through local school authorities. But what you end up with in the end is not a coordinated system, but in fact a huge archipelago of uncoordinated, usually small and unstable programs that are very, very difficult for families to navigate through, that by and large do not cover the whole province and all of the children, that by and large are not controlled for their quality and accessibility one way or another. And so parents are left at the bottom of a sea of uncoordinated programs. What we really need in Canada is a very different kind of a model. What we need are systems that are integrated at the local level, which have opportunities for problem-based play, really good play opportunities for children, because children learn, particularly when they are very young, through play, that create opportunities for flexible parental participation so that parents can participate when they are not working, but allow them to be able to go to work without penalty, that have resources for families in terms of books, in terms of toys, in terms of help with parenting issues, that have high-quality nutrition associated with them, that are seamlessly connected to pre- and postnatal supports, and finally that offer full-day, full-year options and not just options that go 9 to 5. So that is what we need at the local level. And the idea, for instance, of turning every elementary school in the province into a hub for early child development programs of this sort makes a lot of sense. However, in order for something like this to occur, these programs and centers then need to be embedded in a comprehensive policy framework which takes into account and brings in the ministries of education, the ministries of health, the ministries of social service, the ministries of children and family development into a coherent policy framework, which means then the flow of tax money in an organized and coherent way to the local level so that programs can be properly arrayed and organized and made seamless and universally accessible. That's the kind of model that Canada needs. And if you go into any of the countries in the world that do better than Canada in terms of early childhood, that is what they do. And so when we look at what UNICEF has got to say about how well Canada is investing in early childhood development through education and care programs, and whether or not it is meeting internationally recognized benchmarks, what we see is something that really doesn't make Canada look very good. This graph before you here shows how many of the 10 UNICEF benchmarks Canada actually meets. And these benchmarks go everything from the coverage rates we have for immunization, to the quality and accessibility of early childhood care programs, to whether or not we have trained and qualified workers in our child care programs, to whether or not the paternity and maternity leave benefits we have are comprehensive and adequate and go for a long enough period of time. What you can see is, whereas a country like Sweden meets all 10 of these benchmarks, Canada only meets 1 out of 10. And in fact, Canada is tied for Ireland for last place among the wealthy countries of the world in terms of meeting the benchmarks. It shouldn't surprise you to know that when you look at a country like Sweden and you ask what fraction of their children come to school vulnerable in their development, well, across Swedish society it runs at 10 to 15%, whereas in Canada right now it's running at close to 30%. And we really shouldn't be surprised, because in a country like Sweden, they are spending as much as 2% of their gross domestic product on investments in early childhood, whereas Canada is spending less than 0.5%. And in early childhood, it is a place that if you invest wisely, you get what you pay for. And so Canadian society at the moment is letting its families down. What then can we say about the later years? Am I here to say that because the early years are so important that it's all over by the time kids reach school age and there's really nothing you can do to influence their development? And the answer to that is no. I'm not here to say that at all. The fact is that windows of opportunity for growth and development continue to open and close throughout the life course. And the importance of taking a developmental approach in society is to do what's appropriate at different points in time. Now, this next slide I'm going to show you, what it shows is that for North American society, as it now is, where is our greatest opportunity to make a difference? In other words, if we had a new dollar to spend, where would we get the greatest returns on our investment? And what this graph shows is that the greatest returns we would get on our investment at this point is in the early years. Why? Because we're already spending more than $7,000 per child during the school years. Whereas in the early years, Canadian society only spends about $1,000 per child. In other words, the greatest marginal investment is in the early years. But during the school years, there are great opportunities to make a difference for how children thrive. We know, for instance, that we can do a huge amount in the school environments to change the social and emotional climate of the schools. And when we do, the opportunities for children to do better goes up. We know there are huge opportunities to prevent mental health problems during school age and to boost children's development by problem-oriented interventions that improve their numeracy and their literacy skills. And we know that if we create environments that are welcoming and supportive of families and that deal with the diversity of Canadian society, that we can improve children's development very well during those years. This map that I'm showing you here is a little bit complicated. And I won't take you through all the complications, but it's meant to underline how much difference we can make at least in the early years of schooling. What it shows basically is neighborhood by neighborhood across most of the school districts of the province. How are children doing between kindergarten and grade 4? In other words, we're taking the early development indicator that I showed you in the previous section of this video and using it as a baseline and saying, after we consider how vulnerable the children are in a given area, if we fast forward 4 years, How are they doing by grade 4? In the darker areas on this slide, the children are doing relatively well compared to how they did on the early development indicator. In other words, despite the level of vulnerability that we saw at kindergarten age, a relatively high fraction of them are doing well on their literacy and their numeracy skills. However, as you go from the darkest blue areas to the lightest blue areas here, what you see is they're doing relatively less well. In other words, a higher and higher proportion of the vulnerable children in kindergarten are failing to meet the standards we would like for reading or numeracy by grade 4. And also, a higher and higher proportion of the children who were not vulnerable in their development at kindergarten age are nonetheless not meeting the literacy and numeracy targets that we would have for them by grade 4. So what this slide shows is that between kindergarten and grade 4, there's a huge opportunity to make a difference. What it also shows, though, is that there are huge regional differences in how children are doing. In some parts of the province where the knowledge economy is very, very important, children seem to be doing relatively well between kindergarten and grade 4. And yet in other parts of the province that are dominated by the traditional resource extractive economy, there are more problems that we can see. And what the kind of information that is in this visual show is that maybe we need to be thinking about children's development as children grow older differently in different kinds of communities, and asking whether or not children are growing up in environments that are dominated by the information economy or dominated by the resource economy are actually creating different kinds of opportunities for children to grow and develop. So what I'm trying to say to you is the early years are very important, and we need to invest in those early years. But it's not a question that the early years are about immunizing children against the future. That as we go, we have to take a developmental perspective on each phase of development and do the best we can for our children in order for them to reach adulthood with a maximum chance to be healthy, to have a high level of well-being, ability to be lifelong learners, and have good coping skills throughout the life course.